very important for us to remember the legacy of the past. And in that regard, I would encourage all of us to not only study, but relate to in terms of our spiritual ancestry, ancestors in this land, primarily but not exclusively the African Muslims who were brought over here in large numbers. Some say as much as 20% of the enslaved Africans brought to these shores were Muslims. They've left a rich legacy that this isn't the time and place to explore that. But in connecting to that history which precedes this country, there's no way for anyone to say that Muslims are not a legitimate part of this country. When our existence preceded the existence of the country, our Muslim ancestors were instrumental in contributing to the building of this country with their free blood, sweat, and tears, their labor, free labor rather, the blood, sweat, and tears. So in embracing that history, we embrace indigenous roots, no matter where we might come from, whether we have African ancestry or not. We say that the Khadija radiallahu anha, Salama radiallahu anha, Habiba, Aisha radiallahu anhun, and the other wives of the prophets are our mothers. Very few of us have any genealogical connection to them. We say Ibrahim, millata abikum. Ibrahim is our spiritual father. The Quran tells us he's our spiritual father. Very few of us have any genealogical connection to Ibrahim alayhi salam, but those are our mothers. That's our father, and those are our grandfathers and grandmothers in these lands. And I said not exclusively African. There were many, the Syrians, the Lebanese, the Albanians. The first masjids in New England were built by Albanians, 1913 in Lewiston, Maine, 1916 in Waterbury, Connecticut. Those are all our ancestors, and so we have to see their struggle as our struggle rather as a continuation of their struggles. And so we owe it to them to claim their legacy, to live their legacy, and to feel not that this is something we understand intellectually, but this is something we embrace to the very depths of our being.
So, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa Rasulullah. I think one of the legacies that we of this generation need to think about is the legacy we ourselves are going to leave, the legacy that our children are going to inherit. I believe, and I'm not trying to make this to be more grander than it actually is, I do believe this generation is going to play an instrumental role in solidifying the vision and future of Islam in North America. And the reason for this is that, of course, as Imam Zaid said, there's no question Islam's been here for 300-400 years. There's no question about it. However, it is in this generation in particular where Islam has reached an unprecedented level, both in quality and quantity. You know, the generation of immigrants was the generation of our forefathers. They came 60s, 70s, 80s. That's when the Muslims became in the many millions. We have now, I don't know, between 7 to 12 million. Allah knows exactly how many. But for the first time, those that are born and raised here have come of age. And they're now very comfortable in the identity of their parents who were immigrants, and very comfortable in the identity of the land that they were born in. They're equally at home in East and West. How we practice Islam, our vision of melding our American identity with not only our cultural roots, but also our religious identity is going to impact tremendously. It's like a domino effect. How we begin and how we set up our masajid, how we set up our vision is going to trickle down for many, many generations to come. So we need to think long and hard, especially at this generation, about how we are going to not necessarily reconcile, but merge. What is our vision of being a Muslim in America? What does it mean to have connections with the global world around us? Because in the end of the day, we are one ummah, and also have a connection with the nation state that we're born into. How do we reconcile where there's a clash taking place? How about theological, methodological, legal issues that not only are we inheriting from the Middle East and from our ancient tradition, but also also issues of modernity. Our discussions currently taking place, I believe, are going to impact the future of North American Islam. And just to give you one simple example, if you look at, for example, the American Jewish community, a lot of the controversies that they're facing now, they actually emanate from when they first really came of age back in the 1860s, 1870s. The controversies they had about how to practice Judaism back in the 1860s and 70s, it actually resulted in the formation of multiple groups that we're familiar with, the Orthodox, the Conservative, the Reform. These are not groups that were formed, overseas. They were formed by and large in America when American Jews were debating amongst themselves how best to practice Judaism. And their differences trickle down, and to this day, essentially, the stereotypes created 130 years ago are still impacting the modern Jewish American community. We, as the American Muslim level, we are having that conversation that they had 130 years ago. So we need to be very, very perceptive. We need to be brave and bold. We need to be firm where the Sharia requires us to be firm, and open-minded where the Sharia requires us to be open-minded. Bottom line is, I believe we have a very important role to play in this particular generation, and I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to live up to that challenge and pass on a positive legacy to those after us. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. I just want to take a minute first and express gratitude to Imam Zaid and Sheikh Yasir. I'm younger than both of you, and I speak for everybody here in my age bracket and underneath that when I say that we are simply, we're inheriting, mashallah, from the work that y'all did. And so we really appreciate and we ask that Allah reward both of you immensely. Growing up in Chicago, we were used to snow. And I remember on the best days are the days where someone else would shovel your driveway. And I feel like y'all, mashallah, shoveled all of our driveways. So we're able to live our lives now because of the work that you both did and are continuing to do.
Please don't put me in the category of Imam Zaid. I am 20 years younger.
He's not that old yet. Sheikh Yasir a break.
I knew that he'd say something.
He's aspirationally old.
MashaAllah.
I'm straight up old.
Nah. Allah accept. And I mean that. I do think that speaking as somebody who has gone through this sort of generation very recently and is now somewhat of a part of it, but kind of also getting to the other side. I get excited when groceries go on sale. Like, I think that means you're getting old. I think one of the things that we have to keep in focus, and we cannot let it slip away, is the inheritance of this incredible spiritual pedigree that the Prophet ﷺ has given us. Everybody can do good work, but very few people can maintain good work while maintaining goodness with Allah. And that's something that the Prophet ﷺ, in his being sent to us, is part and parcel of the gift that Allah has given us. When the Prophet ﷺ arrived to Medina, I'll never forget, not that I was there, but I'll never forget when I learned the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, when he was speaking to the people, almost like the mission statement of the new city, the new era, he said to everybody, Afsh as-salam, wa ta'im at-ta'am, wasilu al-arham, wa sallu bil-layli wan-nasu niyam. He mentions 4 qualities that are going to need to happen in order for this community to succeed. The first, he says, is that you have to be people who spread peace. And some of the scholars comment and they say this can mean literally, saying salam to one another, or it could mean that you actually, wherever you are somebody that just, your pure presence emanates peace around you. That people feel safe. People feel this sense of tranquility when you walk into the room. They know that they don't have to pick up their wallet or their phone. They know that they don't have to be careful what they say because, it's going to get out of the room. You just inspire that sense of peace. The second thing he says is you need to feed people. Feed food to everybody. Take care of people's nourishment. Take care of their basic needs. The third that the Prophet ﷺ said was make sure that you keep your family ties. We are a community that is built upon the spiritual obligation of making sure that our families are taken care of. But the last thing that he mentions, and this is very powerful, is he says, وَصَلُّوا بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّاسُ نِيَامٌ. Make sure that you pray in the night while everyone else is asleep. And I always wondered, the first three items are very public. But the last one, the Prophet ﷺ specifies that it needs to be done, and he actually even further specifies, not just in the night, but he clarifies and says, while others are asleep. And our teacher has taught us that this is a sign of a person's sincerity. This is a sign of a person's closeness with Allah, that everyone can do the first three, but only a very few select special people can do the last one. And as a result of, if you can complete these four actions, the hadith finishes, تَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ بِالسَّلَامِ, that you will be entered in paradise with peace. This is something that I think when it comes to thriving, this verb that is the focus of this conference and MSA National Conference this weekend, we have to remember that we cannot leave God out of the equation. Our success is solely dependent upon our proximity to Allah. And everything else is incredible, but it has to be anchored by our relationship with God and His Messenger. And this generation is going to come, there's going to be a fork on the road for each and every person, especially in college, where you have to decide if this relationship that you've inherited, if you were born Muslim, or this relationship that you've taken on if you converted to Islam, is actually yours sincerely, or it is something that you are doing for the sake of family or community. And the way you prove that to yourself is وَصَلُّوا بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّاسُ نِيَامٌ. You pray in the night while people are sleeping. We ask Allah to give us sincerity.
So I think the next question has been touched upon a little bit in what we've had in the discussion for the first part. But building off of that, what do you think that our ancestors' vision was for us today? And that could be for the Muslim community, American, global, religious. Do you think that we've lived up to that vision? And is there value in revisiting those early visions of aspirations and projects that they had for us? What is it that they would think that today's generation would be doing?
Oh, we'll break it up, okay.
You're like a dance, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. I'm still trying to figure out what the question was. So, I mean, when it comes to where we are and where our ancestors hope that we should be or could be and what they would say, I think without a doubt, you know, when you look at things from a historical perspective, like Sheikh Yasir mentioned, I mean, these are unprecedented times of growth, of community scaling, of access to different things that we've had. I mean, you know, just even from an educational perspective, when were you able to study the religion with such ease? When were you able to gain access to knowledge and you know, foundationally build your faith and your heart with such, subhanAllah, with such access? I mean, 24 hours a day, you could literally be watching, listening, reading. These are things that are just unprecedented in our history. I mean, there were literally times where people would have to travel hours upon hours just to sit for 1 hour or 30 minutes with their teachers. This is something that Sheikh Yasir, Imam Zaid, when they did their studies overseas, this is something that's not uncommon to them. And so we have a lot of privilege in that regard, but with great privilege comes great responsibility. And I think that if I were to think back about what our ancestors who came to this country would tell us, is don't mess it up. You have a lot of things going for you. But the scary thing about when you have a lot of things going for you is that you tend to become complacent. You tend to settle sometimes for mediocrity. You don't realize, subhanAllah, you don't realize the blessings that you have. Allah says, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا, that you won't even be able to fully appreciate one blessing. And so being given this sort of macro wealth, whether it's talking about material wealth or even just opportunity, is a beautiful gift from Allah, but it's also a great challenge. And I think we have to seize the opportunity and make sure that we, within our own capacity, whatever you can do, are using it to the best of your ability and not becoming distracted by things that ultimately are not going to bring benefit. So I think it's using the privileges that we've had.
To follow up on that, I think that Sheikh AbdelRahman mentioned sort of a dichotomy, things that they would be very, very happy with seeing, to see that one of their spiritual descendants was first place in an international Quran competition. That many masajid, including ours in Oakland, California, there are 5 huffaz, they're all young people from the local community. Each one of them is doing 4 rakats, and even 20 years ago, you're scrambling to find one hafiz from overseas that you can bring to your community. So along those lines, there's been tremendous growth and a lot that they would really, I think, be happy about. But on the other hand, I think their concerns would be the same as the parents of your parents' concerns. Is my child going to remain in Islam? I think there will be things they would absolutely be shocked by and wouldn't recognize. If they went to the average Ramadan during iftar in the average masjid and saw garbage bags of food being thrown into the dumpster, when many of them could barely eat. They were fasting Ramadan on a starvation diet, which the slaves were doing because their diets were designed to starve them to death. The average working life of a slave was 5 years. If they saw people struggling to maintain some sort of Islamic identity, saw people today just doing anything to disassociate outwardly from Islam. If they saw some of the ways that Muslims quickly jump on bandwagons that they wouldn't even recognize, I think a lot of those things would really cause a lot of alarm. And sensing that and understanding how this religion has progressed generationally, certainly it has the flexibility to adapt to various environments, and that's why Islam has been the most mobile idea, like Noah Friedman talks about, and what's the fall and rise of the Islamic State. There are 2 mobile ideas, Islam and democracy. I would argue democracy is not that mobile. How many truly democratic societies have we had historically? You know, you had a semblance of democracy in Greece, ancient Greece, but if you look historically, this is an argument Chris Hedges makes, there hasn't been that many, and someone like Chris Hedges would say this one is already dead. Or as his latest book says, it's the farewell tour of American democracy. So, but Islam, on the other hand, has really been a mobile idea. And that's, we have Asian Muslims, African Muslims, European Muslims, South Asian Muslims, Chinese Muslims, Filipino Muslims as indigenous Muslim communities. And that mobility, on the one hand, has been qualified by a tremendous amount of stability. And that stability has been facilitated by the SNE, al-Isnad min ad-Din. فَلَوْلَا الْإِسْنَادِ لَقَالَ مَنْ شَاءَ مَا شَاءَ. Authenticated chains of transmission are an integral part of the religion. Were not for those chains of transmission, anyone could have said anything and attributed it to Islam. So I think a lot of things they would see are breaks in that chain. And I think that will cause them great alarm. And I think it's our responsibility, this generation's responsibility, in addition to continue the wonderful things that are happening, the very creative things that are happening, make sure that you preserve those chains so that those people who preceded us, whether it's 2 generations ago, or 4 or 5 generations, or 20 generations, when they looked at our community, they would recognize it as a Muslim community as they knew Islam. And they will have the foresight and the understanding to know there are going to be certain variations. But the core of the religion is what they would recognize as Islam.
So I don't want to add anything more because, mashallah, both of them have done a very, very comprehensive response. I just want to give a word of advice to all of you in the audience here, and a suggestion and a plan. And that is that when you go back to your communities, when you go back to your masajid, please speak with the elders. Speak with the pioneers that are still alive. Hear their stories. You know, we're talking about their visions. Alhamdulillah, in every community, by and large, some of those pioneers are still around. So I think one of the gems that we don't really take advantage of is those people who founded the masajid, those people who did what they did, and to hear from them their own struggles so that we can contextualize the blessings that we have. I mean, those of you that were here yesterday, you saw, alhamdulillah, my father, got the award for the community service. Speaking with my father over the years has really opened my eyes. Coming to this land in 1963, as one of the first Muslims, immigrant Muslims obviously, and the struggles that he faced here. Can you believe they didn't know when Eid was until a week after Eid? And they would then gather the people and celebrate Eid a week after. Forget our Eid wars, it was just, like they'd find out it was Eid and they come together. And when you read history books about Muslims in the 50s and 60s, in fact, there were communities that would do Jumu'ah on Sunday, because they would all be working. This is the first immigrant batches that came here in the 50s and whatnot. They didn't have time. These were manual laborers. We're not talking about the slave class. I don't know about them. But in terms of the manual laborers that came here, these were struggling people. I'm not going to talk about the fiqh of whether it's jaiz to do Jumu'ah on Sunday. They didn't have imams and scholars. They had no alternative. They would come together on Sunday, because that was the church day, and they would give a khutbah and pray. Right? SubhanAllah, just to hear those types of stories, my father tells me this, and alhamdulillah, he's still alive, you can ask him. The first Eid in 1963 here, the first Eid took place the first Sunday after they found out it was Eid back in Pakistan. So he called together a bunch of friends, and they said, we're going to meet at the University of Houston, UC, University Center at the University of Houston, and 3 people showed up for the first Eid of Houston, Texas. And there is no imam, there is no sheikh. They look around themselves and they tell my dad, okay, you lead the salah. He's never led salah in his life, right? Now he's told to lead the Eid salah. And subhanAllah, he could never have imagined that in his own generation, in Houston, Texas, over 35,000 people would be praying Eid salah in his own generation. So,
Takbir.
The vision that they had for the future, I mean, let's not romanticize it. They had no idea what it would happen. And as Imam Zaid said, they would be positively shocked, and they would also be negatively shocked as well. They would see things that they wouldn't recognize as being within Islam, and they would see things in their wildest dreams they could never have imagined. So while they're still amongst us, I encourage all of you, speak to your elders, speak to the pioneers of your own communities, and videotape them, especially those that founded the masajid. Do video interviews, ask them their problems, their struggles, so that you can document and preserve their heritage and their legacy for future generations.